Help keep Kinks and Beats Daily alive with a $4 monthly contribution and receive exclusive bonus episodes as our thank you to you. Visit herohabit.com/shop for more details. Welcome to Kinks and Beats Daily. I'm your host, Tony Fry. This is episode 183. Thank you for downloading. If you haven't done so already, please swing by iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and review. That rating, even if you don't listen on iTunes, if you have an account, leave that rating and a review because it helps us tremendously. And of course, if you haven't called in yet with your Change of Heart song, I'm still taking submissions for that. Give me a call at 925-494-1739 and let me know what song by the Beatles or the Kinks or their solo artists respectively you've changed your opinion on over the years. Something you used to love that now you hate, something that you used to hate that now you love. I want to know the song. I want to know how your mind was changed, what inspired the change. And if you can think of 5 songs, leave me 5 different voicemails. Again, 925-494-1739. We're going to use that as a bonus episode once I've compiled a good amount of listener feedback. Also, if you haven't done so already, follow our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/kinksandbeats, and follow us on Twitter. We have a new Twitter account that's going to be more informative. There'll be different stuff on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook's more conversational, and the Twitter is going to be more informational. So follow both and share it with all your friends. All right, today we are talking about a George Harrison song called Woman, Don't You Cry for Me. It was released November 19th, 1976 as the opening track to Harrison's 33 1/3 album, and it was also released as the B-side to the single It's What You Value on May 31st, 1977. I believe that was the 3rd single off of this album. This album did spawn some hits, but I do not believe that was one of them. The song actually roots back to 1969. While George was on tour with Delaney and Bonnie. And you'll remember from the My Sweet Lord episode that's on that tour with Delaney and Bonnie that him and Clapton were on. That's where he learned to play slide guitar. That's where he wrote My Sweet Lord. This tour was really a huge moment in George's musical development. And for a minute, this song was considered for inclusion on All Things Must Pass. And I'm kind of glad they didn't because I think Phil Spector would have wrecked this. And I think that the musicians that Harrison had lined up for 33 1/3 do what this song needed to have done. If you listen to a demo of the song from those early days, which is included on Early Takes Volume 1, it had more of a swampy country vibe. But the finished version on 33 1/3, much more grounded in funk, and probably due to including Willie Weeks on bass, with very funky slap bass. I mean, it slaps all over the place. And this is one of those songs that I have changed my opinion on. Speaking of that podcast topic I want you guys to contribute on. I've changed my opinion on this as I gotten older. When I first heard this album, probably sometime in high school, because this was one of the first solo George albums I got. And this was in the 90s when a lot of his stuff was hard to find on CD. I managed to get this one. I had Living in the Material World, and this was one of the few that you could actually track down. And at that time, I didn't really know much about funk. And I certainly couldn't appreciate the melding of funk, rock, and country and Indian music to a certain degree. But as my tastes expanded, as I developed as a musician and started playing with different groups and getting these gigs where I was playing with guys that could play bass like that, or drums like this, you start digging into other stuff. And you start learning, well, I like the way that guy plays bass and he's, influenced by this guy. So I'm going to start looking into that. And you're going down this rabbit hole of all this new music. So my tastes have expanded since then in the 25 years since I got this album. And I've come to love this song and think it's one of Harrison's best album openers. It opens with that little drum fill and then the, that funky bass line. It's just cool stuff all around. And it almost shouldn't work because the whole song is a hodgepodge of sounds. Willie Weeks, like I mentioned, driving a funky bass that's full of slap pop and groove harder than anything on any previous Harrison track. And then David Foster adds that cool funk clavinet part that's kind of reminiscent of Stevie Wonder's Superstition. But then you have Richard T. playing on organ, and his organ part basically sounds like drones in the background, at least through the verse. And that's a tool Harrison pulled from his study of Indian music. That drone, it appears on the next song on 33 1/3 as well. That drone is an Indian feature. That's not necessarily something that you hear in funk songs. And then George is basically playing country slide guitar on top of all this. So you got all this weird mishmash of styles and influences and stuff all coming together, and it shouldn't work, but it all works because he's surrounded himself with incredible musicians for this album. He's not playing with a guy who is trying to sound like a funky bass player. He's playing with a funky bass player. He's playing with a funky drummer. He's got the parts covered by experts. And so, that kind of mismatch works under those circumstances. The guitar on this track is tuned to an open E. And what that means is if you strum all the strings without pressing any of the frets down, it sounds like an E major chord. And you can achieve this by raising the third string a half step to G sharp, the fourth string a whole step to E, and the fifth string a whole step to B. And when you do that, you use a slide, you can play any major chord just by placing the slide across the board. Right? So like if it's an open E and then I put the slide on the first fret, now it's an open F. And on the third fret, it's an open G. So all the major chords are in play with a slide. You don't have to have any fingers added onto it. And it also opens you up when you're doing lead lines. It creates more harmonic intervals at the fret that you can use to harmonize your lead lines. Since this song only uses two chords, E and A, he can play with those open chords a lot and pull his lead lines and his riffs right out of that. So he's basically you're on the E. If he puts the slide on the fifth fret, he's on the A. That's the only two chords. He starts adding sevenths and stuff, but it's E7 and A7. I mean, he never deviates from those two chords. This is a great song from a musician standpoint. The lyrics are kind of weird. I forgive him. This is not about the lyrics. But musically, it's very cool, and it sets up an outstanding album on the right foot. I can't wait to do a full episode on this album because this is one of my favorite of any of the solo Beatles, but especially George. This is one of my favorite Harrison albums. And the sound on this is incredible. If you haven't heard it, you can, of course, follow our Spotify playlist. But just download all of 33 1/3. Go buy it and enjoy it. It's a solid album. You're not going to be, if you're listening to this podcast, you won't be disappointed with 33 1/3 by George Harrison. All right. If you need to get a hold of me and you've forgotten all the ways I told you could do it, just go to herohabit.com and under the podcast button, you will find all the ways you can get a hold of me via phone, via email, via our social media. And I hope that you will. Let's get more people involved on the social media side and start growing that conversation. All right. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Thanks for listening. This podcast is presented by the Hero Habit Podcast Network. Swing by HeroHabit.com today to comment on this episode and poke around our growing database of sports and pop culture news, reviews, and collectibles. HeroHabit.com. Collect your heroes.